all started like any other night. I was on my usual delivery route, driving through back roads surrounded by thick woods and quiet neighborhoods. It was about 3:30 in the morning, pitch dark except for the headlights of my beat-up car. I had my favorite true crime podcast playing, something about unsolved murders, and a lukewarm coffee in the cup holder to keep me awake. I'd done this route 100 times, but that night felt off. I couldn't explain it. My chest felt tight like a bad premonition creeping up on me. Maybe it was just lack of sleep or too much caffeine, but every shadow seemed longer, every turn quieter. Even the woods on either side of the road seemed darker than usual. I brushed it off and kept driving. You're just psyching yourself out, I told myself. But the feeling stuck, clawing at the back of my mind. I was halfway through my route when I saw him, a man stumbling into the middle of the road, waving his arms. I slammed on the brakes, my heart jumping into my throat. He came out of nowhere. My headlights barely caught him. He was wearing a dark hoodie and jeans blending into the night. Normally, I wouldn't stop. I listened to enough horror stories to know better. But something about him made me pause. He looked desperate, like he'd been through hell. So I rolled down my window just a crack, enough to talk, but not enough to let him get too close. My car was still running, just in case. "Hey, you all right?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. His eyes were wild, darting around like he expected someone to jump out of the trees. "He's coming for me," he gasped. "Please, you gotta help me." "What? Who's coming for you?" He leaned closer, and I could see the sweat on his face despite the cold air. "I was walking my dog," he started, his words tumbling out in a rush. "Something attacked him. I thought it was a coyote or something, but then I saw him, a man running after me with a knife." I stared at him, trying to make sense of what he was saying. His hands were shaking and he looked scared out of his mind. But then I noticed something weird. There was no blood on him, no dirt, no scratches. If his dog was attacked, where was the evidence? "Where's your dog?" I asked. His face froze. For a second, he didn't say anything. Then he blinked, like he'd just remembered how to speak. "Gone." I ran before he could get me too. Something about his story didn't sit right. My gut screamed at me to drive off, but I hesitated. That was my first mistake. I kept my foot on the brake, my hands gripping the wheel tighter than I realized. "Okay," I said slowly, trying to sound calm. "But if this guy was chasing you with a knife, how'd you get away? Did he stop?" He looked at me, his eyes flicking to the woods on either side of the road, then back to me. "I don't know," he muttered. "I just ran. I didn't look back. My dog was..." He trailed off, his voice breaking. I don't know if it was a man or something else. That's when the alarm bells in my head got louder. His words didn't make sense. He was shaking, yeah, but his clothes were spotless. No blood, no dirt, no tears. Nothing that screamed, "I just escaped a killer." I glanced over his shoulder at the woods. The trees swayed slightly in the wind, but there was no sign of anyone. No sound, just the low hum of my car engine and the distant buzz of power lines. "Why isn't there any blood on you?" I blurted out before I could stop myself. "If your dog was attacked, wouldn't there be something?" His whole body stiffened. It was like I'd flipped a switch. The fear drained from his face, replaced by, I don't know how to explain it, calm, too calm. "You're observant," he said, almost in a whisper. His voice was different now, smooth, steady, and way too composed. He tilted his head slightly like he was studying me, and for a moment I swear his eyes looked darker. Not just in the shadows, but like the color itself shifted. "That's good." My stomach dropped. Something was wrong. Really wrong. "What's good?" I asked, my voice shaky. I didn't even care if I sounded scared. I was scared. He smiled then, a slow, crooked grin that made my skin crawl. It wasn't just a smile. It was like he knew something I didn't. Like he was in on a joke and I was the punchline. "That you're paying attention," he said. And then he leaned in closer, his face just inches from the crack in my window. "You're going to help me," he said, his breath fogging the glass. That's when I noticed his hands. They weren't trembling anymore. In fact, they were perfectly still, pressed flat against the side of my car. His fingernails were wrong. Too long, almost claw-like. I didn't even see when he put them there. I panicked. I hit the button to roll up the window, but before it could close all the way, he slapped the glass hard. The sound echoed in the silence, and I flinched so hard I nearly let go of the wheel. His face twisted into something grotesque. His grin stretched too wide, his teeth unnaturally sharp. And then he laughed. A deep, guttural laugh that sent chills down my spine. Before I could think, I threw the car into drive and slammed my foot on the gas. The tires screeched, and for a split second, I thought I saw his reflection in the rearview mirror. But it wasn't him. It couldn't be. Whatever I saw had eyes that glowed red in the darkness. I didn't stop driving. I didn't even look back. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst out of my chest. I was gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My foot slammed on the gas. The road stretched out in front of me, but my eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him, or it, chasing after me. I wanted to believe it was just my imagination, but the laughter, I could still hear it, faint and distorted, like it was following me, getting into my head. I was doing at least 60 miles an hour, but the sound wouldn't go away. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. My blood ran cold. Someone was running alongside my car, keeping up with me. It didn't make sense. I was flying down the road, but there he was, his dark figure darting between the trees, barely visible in the headlights. I tried to focus on the road, but I couldn't stop glancing at him. Every time I looked, he was closer. His face flashed in and out of view, distorted by the trees. And then, in a blur, he wasn't outside anymore. The passenger door rattled violently, like someone was trying to rip it open. My heart stopped. I hadn't even realized I'd unlocked the doors earlier. I reached over, fumbling with the lock button, but the rattling stopped just as suddenly as it started. I looked back at the road only to see something step out in front of me. Him, standing there in the middle of the lane, his twisted grin catching the light. I swerved hard, narrowly missing him, and the car skidded onto the shoulder. Gravel flew everywhere, and for a moment I thought I was going to flip the car. But I managed to regain control and get back on the road, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't see him anymore, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still there, lurking, waiting. When I finally pulled into the parking lot at work, I didn't get out of the car right away. I sat there, gripping the wheel, trying to catch my breath. My hands were shaking so bad, I couldn't even turn off the engine. The lot was empty except for the flickering streetlight overhead, and every shadow felt like it was crawling toward me. I kept telling myself it was over, that I'd gotten away. But the feeling wouldn't leave. My ears were still ringing with the sound of his laughter, and every time I blinked I saw his face. Those dark, soulless eyes, that unnatural smile. I finally forced myself to get out of the car, my legs like jelly. I needed to tell someone what happened, but who would believe me? I barely believed it myself. As I walked toward the building, I glanced back at my car, half expecting to see him sitting in the passenger seat, waiting for me. But it was empty. Thank God, it was empty. Inside, the fluorescent lights were harsh and unforgiving. I collapsed into a chair in the break room, my head in my hands. My co-workers trickled in one by one, oblivious to what I'd just been through. I didn't say anything. What could I say? Hey, I think I just met a demon on my drive to work. I tried to brush it off, tell myself it was just some crazy guy messing with me. But deep down, I knew the truth. That wasn't human. No one can run like that, move like that. No one's eyes glow red in the dark. I never took that route again. Hell, I barely drive at night anymore. And even now, I still check my rearview mirror a little too often. Because what if he's still out there waiting for me to stop the car? I still remember that night like it just happened. It was December 2015 and I was driving south on I-70, cutting through the Midwest. It was one of those endless stretches of highway surrounded by dark, looming trees on both sides. I'd just finished my finals, and all I wanted was to get home for the holidays. The road was empty, like really empty. No headlights in my rear view, no taillights ahead. Just me, the hum of my little sedan, and the glow of my dashboard. It was peaceful for a while, but there was also this eerie silence. You know, that kind that gets under your skin? Yeah, that. I was messing with the playlist on my phone when I saw it. Far back in the mirror, headlights. Not a big deal at first, but they were moving fast. I figured someone was in a hurry, so I got back into the right lane and waited for them to pass. When the vehicle got closer, I saw it was a massive orange semi-truck. It roared up behind me, its lights flooding my car. I slowed down a little, giving it space to pass. Instead, it just stayed there, tailing me. I started to get this uneasy feeling in my gut. Maybe the driver was just being cautious. But then, without warning, the truck pulled up alongside me. That's when it happened. The driver switched on a bright spotlight from the side of the truck, aiming it directly into my car. For a moment, I froze. The light was blinding, and it lit up everything. The empty passenger seat, the bags in the back, and me gripping the wheel tighter than ever. I thought, maybe this guy wants me to pull over. Maybe something's wrong with my car. But something about it felt off. Real off. I slowed down, hoping the truck would just pass and leave me alone. It didn't. It slowed down too, keeping pace with me. The light stayed on, tracking me like a spotlight on stage. All right, this is weird, I muttered to myself, trying to shake the panic creeping up my spine. When the light finally turned off, I sighed in relief. Too soon. The truck merged in front of me, taking the middle lane. I thought, great, it's over. But the moment I tried to switch to the far left lane to get away, the truck moved too. It was like a game, one I didn't agree to play. Every move I made, the truck matched. I stayed in my lane, staring straight ahead, refusing to look over. I didn't want to see the driver. I didn't want to know what kind of person would do this. Finally, I decided to outsmart him. I slowed way down, letting the truck get ahead, then switched to the far right lane and hit the gas. For a few precious seconds, I thought I'd shaken him. But then, those same blinding headlights filled my mirror again, and I swear, my heart stopped. The truck wasn't just following me now. It was gaining. Fast. I slammed my foot on the gas, my little car shaking as I pushed it past 80 mph. The truck stayed right behind me, its headlights burning into my mirrors. I didn't care if I got a ticket, I just needed to get away. But no matter how fast I went, that giant orange semi stuck with me. I could hear its engine growling, its tires roaring against the asphalt. It was like it wasn't just chasing me, it was hunting me. Why is this happening? I whispered to myself, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I thought about pulling over, but what would that do? Let the driver catch me? No way. I was better off staying on the move. The truck suddenly swerved into the left lane, pulling up beside me again. My breath caught in my throat as the spotlight came back on, flooding the side of my car with blinding light. It wasn't just scary, it felt personal, like this guy was trying to break me down. "Come on, leave me alone," I yelled, even though I knew he couldn't hear me. I slowed down, hoping he'd pass, but he matched my speed again. Every move I made, he mirrored it. It was like he knew exactly what I was going to do. My mind raced for options. I couldn't just keep driving like this forever. Then I spotted it, a sign for an upcoming exit. If I could just time it right, I might be able to lose him. The exit was half a mile away. I stayed calm, keeping my speed steady so the driver wouldn't suspect anything. The truck was still beside me, the spotlight off now, but I could feel the tension building. "Wait for it," I muttered, glancing at the sign as it got closer. As soon as the truck pulled a little ahead, I slammed on the brakes and swerved behind it, cutting over to the exit lane. My tires screeched, the car shuddering as I veered onto the off-ramp. I looked in the rearview mirror, my heart pounding. The truck had missed the exit, barreling straight down the highway. For the first time in what felt like hours, I could breathe, but I wasn't safe yet. I kept driving down the dark, narrow road, putting as much distance between me and the highway as possible. After a few miles, I saw the faint glow of neon lights up ahead. A diner. I pulled into the gravel parking lot, my hands trembling as I killed the engine. The place looked deserted except for a couple of cars parked out front. I didn't care. I just needed to get inside and regroup. Inside, the diner was quiet, the hum of an old jukebox filling the air. I slid into a booth near the back, my eyes darting to the door every time it swung open. I ordered a coffee, barely touching it as I tried to steady my nerves. The image of that truck, those blinding lights, the growling engine, was burned into my mind. Then, just as I started to relax, the bell over the diner door jingled. I froze. A man in a worn trucker hat stepped inside, his boots echoing on the tiled floor. He scanned the room, his gaze landing on me for just a second too long. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The man stood by the door for a moment, his eyes scanning the diner before he walked to the counter. He ordered coffee, his voice low but rough, and then turned to glance at me again. I tried to act normal, stirring my untouched cup of coffee, but my hands were shaking so bad I had to grip the mug with both hands to keep it steady. Could this be the truck driver? I couldn't be sure, but the way he kept looking at me made my stomach churn. The man took his coffee and sat at the counter, his back to me. I debated what to do. Running back to my car felt dangerous, but staying here felt worse. What if he was waiting for me to leave? I decided to test him. Slowly, I slid out of the booth and walked toward the restroom in the back of the diner. As I passed him, I kept my head down, pretending to check my phone. Once inside the restroom, I locked the door and leaned against it, my heart racing. I needed to get out of there, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he'd follow me. I stayed in the restroom longer than I should have, hoping he'd leave. When I finally mustered the courage to crack the door open and peek out, the counter stool where he'd been sitting was empty. Relief washed over me, until I saw his truck parked outside right next to mine. I froze. My brain screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. He was still out there waiting. I had to make a move before he cornered me. I slipped out the back door of the diner, walking as quietly as I could toward my car. The gravel crunched under my boots, every sound amplified in the still night. When I was about 10 feet from my car, I heard it, the rumble of a truck engine. My blood turned to ice. I sprinted the rest of the way, yanking the door open and slamming it shut just as the truck's headlights roared to life. He'd been waiting for me. I threw the car into reverse, gravel spraying as I sped out of the lot. The truck's massive frame turned to follow, its headlights flooding my rearview mirror again. This time he wasn't holding back. The truck was faster than I expected, gaining on me even as I floored it. The road twisted and turned, lined with trees that seemed to close in around me. Then I saw it, a bridge up ahead. It was narrow, one lane, with nowhere to pull over. I had no choice but to cross it, and as I did, the truck was right behind me, its engine roaring louder than ever. Halfway across, I slammed on my brakes. The truck swerved, its horn blaring as it barely missed slamming into me. I didn't wait to see what he'd do next. I threw the car into drive and sped off the bridge, my tires screeching as I took a sharp turn onto another road. Somehow, I managed to lose him. The truck didn't appear in my mirror again, and after a few miles, I found myself pulling into the lot of a small-town police station. I stumbled inside, trying to explain what had happened to the officer at the desk. He listened carefully, his expression grim. "You're not the first person to report something like this," he said, leaning back in his chair. "A truck like that, orange cab, big spotlight. There have been sightings on these roads for years, but no one's ever caught the driver." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wasn't the first. They sent a patrol car to check the area, but when the officer came back, he just shook his head. No truck, no driver. It was like the guy had vanished into thin air. I eventually made it to my hotel, but I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those blinding lights, heard the growl of that engine. Even now, years later, I can't drive on an empty highway without looking over my shoulder. And sometimes when the night is quiet and the road is dark, I swear I see a flash of orange in my rearview mirror. It all started on a freezing December evening. I was driving through the snow-covered roads of Pennsylvania on my way to visit my sister. It wasn't supposed to be a big deal, a quick weekend trip, nothing fancy. But the weather had other plans. The snow came down hard, and soon the roads turned into a slippery mess. The thought of continuing my drive felt dangerous. Every passing mile made my hands grip the wheel tighter. Reluctantly, I decided to pull over at a small diner I spotted off the highway. The sign above flickered, struggling to stay lit in the storm. Inside, the place was quiet, almost too quiet. Just a couple of truckers sat in a booth, and an older waitress shuffled between the counter and the kitchen. I ordered coffee and casually mentioned to her that I needed a place to stay for the night. That's when he spoke up. From the corner of the diner, a man I hadn't noticed before turned to me. "There's a place not far from here," he said. "Silver Moon Lodge, cheap and decent." I don't know why, but his voice gave me chills. He looked ordinary enough. A trucker's cap pulled low over his forehead and a scruffy beard. Still, something about his eyes felt off. I thanked him, paid for my coffee, and walked out. The snow crunched under my boots as I got into my car, replaying the interaction in my mind. Something felt weird, but what choice did I have? Driving any further wasn't safe, and I wasn't about to sleep in my car. The Silver Moon Lodge wasn't exactly welcoming. It sat on a lonely stretch of road surrounded by bare trees coated in ice. The neon vacancy sign buzzed and flickered. The receptionist, Roy, didn't make me feel any better. He barely looked at me as he handed over the key. "Room 12, he said flatly, sliding the key across the counter. The lobby smelled faintly of mildew and something metallic. The room wasn't much better. The wallpaper peeled in places, the heater groaned like it was dying, and there was a single dim lamp on the nightstand. But at least it was warm. I dropped my bag on the bed, trying to convince myself that this was fine, just one night. Then I noticed the window. It was slightly open, just enough to let in the icy air. I closed it quickly, feeling uneasy. Was it left open by mistake, or had someone been in here? Shaking off the thought, I grabbed my phone and headed to the reception to get the Wi-Fi password. The walk back to my room felt eerie. Snowflakes fell heavily, and the crunch of my boots sounded too loud in the quiet. When I reached the door, I froze. There were footprints in the snow, fresh ones leading straight to my room. My heart raced as I stood there staring at the prints. I wanted to believe they were mine from earlier, but they were deeper, like someone heavier had been there. Slowly, I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Everything looked the same, until I heard it. A faint shuffling sound from the bathroom. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. No answer. I should have run, but instead I took a few steps closer. The bathroom door was slightly ajar, and I could see the faint outline of someone inside. Panic set in. My mind screamed at me to leave. Without another thought, I bolted out of the room and straight to the reception. Roy looked up lazily as I burst in. "There's someone in my room," I shouted. He frowned, then shrugged. "Let me grab Carl. He'll check it out." "Call the police," I demanded. "No need for that," Roy said, already heading to the back. I couldn't believe it. Was he serious? Minutes later, Roy returned with a tall, burly man who introduced himself as Carl. "We'll take care of it," he said with a grin that made my stomach turn. Back at the room, we found nothing. The bathroom window was wide open, snow piling on the sill. As Carl closed the window, I glanced outside and saw him. Hank. He was standing by the edge of the parking lot near a beat-up truck. Our eyes met, and he smirked before getting into the vehicle and driving off. "See?" Carl said. "Probably just a drifter. You're safe now." But I didn't feel safe. Roy and Carl offered to move me to another room. "For your peace of mind," Roy said. I didn't want to stay, but where else could I go in the middle of a snowstorm? Room 15 was slightly better, or so I thought. As I sat on the bed, trying to calm myself, I noticed something odd. A piece of paper stuck under the mattress. I pulled it out, and my blood ran cold. "You shouldn't have come here." I stared at the note, my hands shaking. Who left this? Was it for me or someone else who stayed here before? Then I heard it again, a noise, this time from the hallway. I crept to the door and peeked through the peephole. Hank was there. He stood just outside my door, staring at it like he was waiting for something. That was it. I grabbed my things and bolted. Forget the storm, forget everything. I just needed to get out of there. As I drove away, I kept checking my rearview mirror. At first, the road was empty, but then I saw headlights, a truck following too closely. It was him. He stayed on my tail for miles, the lights blinding in my mirror. My heart pounded as I tried to lose him, but the icy roads made every turn a gamble. Just when I thought he would catch up, I spotted a police cruiser parked by the side of the road. I flashed my high beams frantically, praying they'd notice. The officer stepped out, and Hank's truck immediately swerved off the road, disappearing into the woods. By the time I reached my sister's house, I was a wreck. My hands were shaking, my voice barely steady enough to tell her what had happened. I wanted to believe it was over, that I was safe. But as I unpacked my bag later that night, I found something that wasn't mine. Another note. "You escaped. For now." I'll never forget that night. Every creak, every shadow, every set of headlights behind me feels like it could be him. And I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again. I grew up in the Midwest, surrounded by endless fields, back roads, and tiny towns that still hadn't been swallowed up by the concrete jungle. It was peaceful, sure, but man, being a teenager there could be dull. No clubs, no cool hangout spots, just the same diner or drive-in over and over again. If you've ever lived in a rural area, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So, to kill time, my friends and I would get creative, like sneaking into abandoned barns or just driving around aimlessly. One of my favorite things, though, was cruising alone late at night. There's something about the empty roads, the hum of the engine, and the music blasting that felt freeing. It was my way to clear my head. One summer night, I decided to do just that. I filled up the tank, grabbed a cold drink, and hit the road. The air was warm and the sky was perfect. Stars everywhere. I wasn't in a rush, so I took this back road that eventually led to a small, isolated park. The drive itself was stunning, especially at night, but the farther I went, the emptier it got. At some point, the houses stopped, and it was just me, the road, and miles of fields. The kind of emptiness that could make you feel like the last person on Earth. I had my music on, but even that didn't stop this weird feeling from creeping in. You know that itch at the back of your neck when you think someone's watching? Yeah, that. About 10 minutes from the park, I saw something or someone on the side of the road. Just a shape in my headlights, but when I got closer, it was gone. Probably nothing, I told myself. Maybe a deer or just my imagination. Still, it stuck with me as I drove on. The park was dead, as expected. No lights, no people, just an empty parking lot surrounded by trees and trails. I made a slow lap around, the gravel crunching under my tires, taking it all in. Then I saw it. A tree had fallen across the road leading out. It wasn't huge, but definitely big enough to block my car. I thought about reversing all the way back, but the idea of navigating those narrow curves in the dark sounded worse. Instead, I decided to pull onto the grass to turn around. Big mistake. The grass was soaked from a storm the night before, and my back tires sank right into the mud. No matter how much I hit the gas, the wheels just spun. I tried everything, rocking the car, angling the tires, but I was stuck. Panic set in. My phone had a signal, thank God, so I called my parents. They weren't thrilled about being woken up at 3 a.m. to bail me out, but they said they'd call a tow truck and let me know when it was on the way. While I waited, I noticed a field just ahead, lit faintly by the moonlight. It was full of deer, at least 30 or 40 of them, all grazing or wandering around. At first, I thought it was cool. Then I realized they weren't moving anymore. All of them were frozen, staring toward the woods. I tried to shake off the unease. "It's just animals," I muttered. I locked my doors, turned up my music, and tried to chill. But that feeling, the one where the air gets heavy and your skin prickles, it wasn't going away. I woke up to that awful feeling. You know? The one where you're certain someone's watching you. My heart was racing before I even opened my eyes. I sat up, scanning the area. The deer were still there, frozen like statues. But now something was different. There was a figure standing at the edge of the trees, just barely in the shadows. I squinted, trying to make out details, but it didn't move. It just stood there, tall and unnervingly still. I fumbled for my knife in the glove box, gripping it like it would actually help. My headlights were still on, but the figure stayed just out of reach, shrouded in darkness. Then my phone buzzed. My parents called to say the tow truck was about 15 minutes out. I didn't tell them about the figure. I didn't want to sound crazy. Minutes felt like hours. The figure didn't move, and neither did I. The deer suddenly bolted, running full speed into the woods. Whatever was in those trees, it had to be worse than me sitting there. Finally, I saw the truck's lights cutting through the darkness. The driver was calm, acting like this was just another night on the job. I didn't care. I just wanted out of there. As we pulled away, I couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror. That's when I saw it. A man stepping out from the tree line, standing in the middle of the road watching us leave. I didn't see his face or what he was wearing, but the way he stood there motionless sent chills down my spine. I floored it the second we hit the main road, blowing through stop signs and red lights. All I wanted was to get home. When I finally made it, I locked every door and window in the house before collapsing onto my bed. Sleep didn't come, though. My mind kept replaying that figure in the road, the deer, the feeling of being watched. The next day, I searched online for stories about the area. Reports of strange figures, homeless camps, anything that could explain what I saw. Nothing fit. Maybe it was a drifter or someone living off the grid, but what if it wasn't? What if it was something worse? I've never gone back to that park, not even in broad daylight, and I never do those late-night drives anymore. Whatever was out there that night, I'm just glad I didn't stick around to find out.